Jungle podcast is raw, it's real, it has zero gimmicks, zero bullshit, and absolutely zero fucks to give.
Welcome to the Iron Jungle. This is real, no bullshit, no holds barred, wide fucking open podcast.
We've been at this far too long to be fucking around. This is the jungle, where anything goes, no holds barred.
We're going to be talking about the real shit. How to succeed in a world where you have goals, but there's so much misinformation and bullshit trying to sell you something. This is the informative podcast. And there's no holds barred in the jungle.
The question is, are you ready? Welcome to the jungle.
Welcome to the jungle, baby.
Welcome to the Iron Jungle. Let's go. What up, guys and girls? Welcome inside the Iron Jungle podcast. Vanilla Gorilla, Drew Peter, Ryan Buckeye here with a topic. You guys saw the topic. You clicked on it. You're here to listen. You're here to be educated from two men who, I would say that we know a little bit about this stuff in terms of just being involved within this industry. Drew has been a competitor for a long time. I'm actually going to be competing in my first show here shortly, but compounds while on contest prep. What does that mean, Drew? What does that mean to you when I say that to you?
In other words, I'm actually going to kick off and preface this episode first by I'm disclaiming in general. Like, this doesn't mean this is medical advice. This doesn't mean this is what you should do. This doesn't advocate that you should use any of the things we're discussing on this episode. It's for informational purposes only. Don't fucking DM me. Well, I guess you can. I'd rather have you do it than fuck yourself up. But you know what I mean. I'm not encouraging anybody to go above and beyond to use things, of course, if you're not comfortable. You don't have to necessarily take things to compete. But the point of this episode is these are the type of compounds you use specifically for getting ready for a show. And I'm talking about pushing your body to insane levels in terms of low body fat while maintaining lean muscle mass, even with these compounds in place. Contest prep is no joke. It's a very serious endeavor. You have to be in it 100% if you truly want to do it to make it worth it. You know, there's risk versus reward. There is an inherent part of this contest. It's like kind of the unspoken things, you know, even on the highest levels, Olympians, so on and so forth. These are all part of the game. It's kind of part of the sport. You know, there's tested organizations. So once again, I'm telling you, you don't have to use these type of things. But if you're talking about commonplace, everyday type of compounds for untested competition, this is kind of the point of this episode, to kind of give a guiding light. I know a few people are going to be curious about this. And, you know, I'm sure it'll spark some good discussion. But I just want to preface the episode kind of with that opening piece as well.
Yeah, I think that's good. Like, we're not here to encourage anybody to go out and buy some of the stuff on the black market and start injecting it into your body because you think or you want to compete. But the fact of the matter is, if you're competing in an untested organization, you're going to be going up against guys and girls who are taking something. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to take something in order to place well or do well. But, I mean, we've seen people that you know, I guess you could call them natural athletes go into, say, an organization like the NPC, and they get housed pretty quickly by somebody that's using a compound. Now, those same people can be like, well, they cheated. No, they didn't. It's an untested organization. It's free-for-all. There's no – cheating does not exist in the NPC. If you're a natty or you're a natural athlete and you take a compound, you come off that compound, you still compete natural, well, then you're kind of a piece of shit, like, because now you're cheating the system. But so to dive into it here, compounds, obviously, most of them are going to be – you know, your anabolic steroids, but there are peptide-based compounds that people can take too. We may or may not get into some of that stuff here on the episode, but the most common compound I think anybody takes is a variation of testosterone, and there are several different variations of testosterone. I know there's test sus, there's test cypionate, propionate, there's test E. I mean, there's blends. So Drew, I mean, in terms of that, people are looking at testosterone, which is a relatively safe compound as well. I mean, assuming you are dosing it correctly within protocol and not like freakishly dosing yourself out of this world, you shouldn't have many side effects. I mean, in terms of maybe some acne and things like that. But most people are going to approach test and be like, they don't know which version is for them and which one they should select. So in like a quick synopsis on the different variations, is there a way to explain to the average listening consumer?
Actually, yeah, think of it this way. There's all of them at the end of the day, all compounds you use in terms of anabolics are derived from the hormone testosterone, okay? So there's different types, you know, there's nandrolones, there's DHT-based things, progesterone-based drugs, so on and so forth. When it comes to test, basically, essentially, the base testosterone molecule, testosterone compound, there's different esters. When I say esters, basically that means how long the half-life of a certain compound is. Things like decanate, enthanate, cypionate are three of the most common ones out there. Those are going to be your longer esters. Typically, you can dose them higher, and how much active testosterone is available like per milliliter when you dose it. The pros of it is you don't have to pin it. When I say pin, I mean inject quite as often. You can get away with pinning once, usually twice a week, depending on what you're doing. A lot of TRT guys are lower dose testosterone, anywhere 200 milligrams would be a sweet spot for that. You can usually get away with pinning that once a week. The half-life will allow you to sustain those testosterone levels, of course, for a week. The downside is it is a longer ester. The ester is quote unquote not going to be as potent, and I'll explain that in a second, compared to something as a short ester. It also, for some people, you may hold a little bit more water retention. There can be a little more aromatization. In other words, aromatization is a conversion of testosterone into estrogen. So there's other things that come into play, AIs, aromatase inhibitors, so on and so forth, that kind of reduce that. We'll discuss that later in the episode.
Right.
So the most common one in America, like typically the U.S. version of a long ester test, is testsipinate. Testosterone ethanoate is considered like a long ester version, typically from European. So both of them are pretty interchangeable. Honestly, between the two, you're not going to see a huge amount of difference. Test-decanate you really don't see, unless, now we're getting a little more complicated here. My personal favorite test, I think overall, aside from test prop, because it just hits really hard, is actually Sustanon 250. Now what that is, that's per milliliter is a blend of 250 milligrams of testosterone of different lengths of esters. You get the best of both worlds. You get some testosterone decanate, as well as phenylpropionate, propionate, and sometimes they even add test acetate, which is super, super, super short. So in that case, you're having different lengths of testosterone in terms of what you're injecting. It keeps the blood levels of the drug stable. So keeping it simple, a lot of times, like for example, if you're looking for somebody to use a first cycle of gear, everybody's like, oh, what should I take? Should I take trends? Should I take EQ? Should I take this? I'm like, no, bro. If you've never used anything before, you have fresh receptors, whether it be contest prep, bulking, so on and so forth. 500 milligrams a week of something like testosterone sipinate or testosterone ethanoate, you will grow like a weed.
Right.
You don't need a ton of gear. And this is before we go any farther, I'll say this too. If you choose to use anabolics, start with as little as you can for as long as you can. And the rationale behind this is someday you will plateau. So think of it this way. If you're like, say, not to be a dick, if you're like 160 pounds and you start blasting all these compounds and all these type of things just to get to 180 pounds and your goal is to be 200, if you blasted all that already, what are you going to do when you plateau around 180 pounds? Are you going to like take 3 or 4 grams of this shit a week?
Right.
That's not how this works. So you got to play the long game here, okay? And I will also say that no matter what you're taking, there's no magic drug out there that's going to get you there overnight. This shit takes a long time. You see these outrageous cycles online and people talk, I took this, and this, and I transformed to this, or they look at what their pros use and, oh, if I don't look like a pro, I got to take what a pro takes. That's not how this shit works.
Right.
So back to what we were saying here. Your long esters is testosterone ethanoate, sipinate, decanate, which you really don't see. And my personal favorite, especially on the current contest prep right now, Sustanon 250 is a great blend of test. You have some shorter ones in there. The most common one is going to be testosterone propionate, which is like a short ester test. And as I alluded to earlier, I'm not sure if you've mixed them up yet in your contest prep. I don't know if you have or in past previouses, but in theory, testosterone prop will be stronger than, say, for example, ethanoate.
Yep.
Now, when you look at this on a milligram basis, okay, how can this be? Okay, so when you look at, say, 100 milligrams of testosterone ethanoate versus 100 milligrams testosterone propionate, keep in mind, testosterone is bonded to the ester. So when your body essentially cleaves that off over time, when you're doing testosterone propionate, I believe the number is around 80 to 85% is going to have an active testosterone ester after the propionate ester is cleaved off, is faster acting, harder hitting. I'll explain that more. Versus ethanoate is around 65, 70%. So after a milligram per milligram basis, you have 60 to 65 milligrams of active test compared to 80 to 85 milligrams of active test. So in a way, you pack more punch when you use a short ester one.
Right.
The downside of short esters is you have to pin more frequently to keep blood levels stable. Right. You're also not going to be able to get as much active testosterone, like you say, I want to take 500 milligrams a week of test. You can do 2 shots of 250 milligrams of testosterone ethanoate versus you're going to need 5 cc's or 5 pins of the testosterone prop because it can't hold as much in solution. You typically see 100 milligrams per milliliter. So I'm kind of leading into that, and I don't want to take over the whole episode with this initial part, but that's kind of an overview base of the initial tests.
And I think, too, on that point, if you are on contest prep and you're using testosterone, most likely the version of testosterone that you take is probably going to change the closer you get to stage, too. So Drew mentioned that, like, test psych, which is what my TRT protocol is, you tend to hold a little bit more water with that. Well, the closer you get to stage time, it's going to get switched to maybe more of a short ester. something along those lines where you're not going to hold as much water because obviously conditioning and you want to be lean and dry, but you still obviously want to maintain that muscle mass. So for me in my situation, like my coach will have me switch, from test site to one of those more shorter. I think we actually talked about prop, if I remember right, closer to showtime. Again, the negative side of that is you are pinning more often, and as you pin, like every little injection point when it comes to contests can be visible on stage. So you obviously, it's a catch-22. You have to juggle what you're going to do in terms of that. But I would say, yeah, the most popular compound that anybody is going to use, whether it's contest prep or if you're going to jump into compounds to begin with, you should start at test. We're going to talk about a strong one here that I've heard people use for this is I've heard some people go to this as their first compound they've ever used, which to me is fucking insane. But Tren. So Tren is one that we hear a lot of people talk about being a super strong anabolic steroid. It's great in terms of a lot of positives to it. I mean, in terms of contest prep, when you're obviously leaning up and shredding it on stage, you want to maintain muscle mass, but it should never be the first one you turn to if you are either just diving into this world, contest prep. You should definitely not start with Tren.
No, I agree. And here's the thing about this too. A lot of times people think, oh, I want to get bigger. Oh, take Tren. I want to cut. Take Tren. Like Tren is like this magical thing. Honestly, the nickname for it is so fucking strong is unicorn blood. Mm-hmm. It's kind of funny that's kind of like the nickname for it. But to me, I feel personally, and I don't care if anybody wants to fight me on this. I really don't care. I think Tren is overrated. If you're looking to add just like straight up lean mass and size, Tren will keep you very dry. At the end of the day, Tren was made and designed on cattle to maintain and even grow lean muscle mass while losing body fat in a super low calorie deficit while waiting to go into slaughter. Tren is made for cattle, though It does a very good job in a contest prep stack. Okay. In terms of the positive benefits of it, it's extremely, extremely potent. You'll notice a nice 3D effect from it. You'll stay very dry. You hardly convert any conversion to estrogen, so you don't have to worry about that. You do have to worry more about progesterone-based side because it can increase. It's a progesterone-based drug for prolactin. Mm-hmm. So sometimes when people start Tren, they start getting issues with gyno and stuff like that. It isn't usually an estrogen issue. It's because they're having issues with prolactin. In that case, things like cabergoline. Some people. What was the other one? I'm off the top of my head. There's another one. Dostinex, I believe that's still Caber. There's another one out there, I can't remember, but it lowers prolactin levels. You don't always have to use that one, but sometimes you have those side effects. People they think that the gyno is an estrogen issue, but often it's prolactin in disguise. I'm gonna throw this one in here too. Honestly, I personally think it can be very useful in a contest prep stack. A very close cousin and one of my favorite off-season compounds freaking ever is NPP, Nandrolone phenylpropionate. Okay. It's a cousin of Tren. They're both progesterone-based drugs. So you get the size and the strength and of Tren, but it's an excellent mass-gaining drug. It's very dry like Tren, and also you get the strength. Your joints feel great, but also it's more for gaining mass and muscle fullness. Mm-hmm. Honestly, I don't in Tren sometimes, especially carb depletion, you can look a little flat. You may look hard, but you may look flat. Right. And I prefer NPP. So honestly, not telling you to do this in any ways. I've even some people kind of stack half and half Tren and NPP to get the best of both worlds. But that's another thing to consider too. And I know some people are throwing encyclopedia drugs and we're on page 1 still. But hey, drugs aren't simple.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's actually something I didn't even know. So Drew's sitting here educating me on the podcast, which is great. Another one that's taken in correlation with Tren quite a bit is Masteron or Mast. Tren Mast is a cycle that you tend to get. A lot of coaches will have you take them simultaneously at the same time. Do you have an experience with that or any feedback on that?
Yeah. Masteron, I think honestly, most people won't see a lot from it if you're taking it by itself. It's a very potent compound, but to me, the best place it adds that nice hardening effect, a fullness effect. It complements Tren when you use, especially at a lower body fat in terms of like fullness and dryness. It's very potent, but I wouldn't take it as a standalone. A lot of times, one of the most common stacks you see, especially in like a cut mix, you'll see it pre-blended, which is super convenient. One that I get has 100 milligrams a piece of test prop, Tren Ace, and Mast prop. And it's per 1 milliliter. So the one that's nice because I can get all my compounds in. I'm not a pin cushion. I'm not pinning a cc of each. I can get all 3 in one. And I'll talk about a few tips and tricks. And once again, I'm not advocating this shit. I'm just saying, hey, this is real. This is a raw episode. But if you're using something like that, you can, of course, get more in there. The downside too, when it comes to compounds, you don't want to go too high in terms of this like stuff. I see like there's out there like a T500 or whatever. That means a 500 milligrams testosterone per milliliter. Do keep in mind that sounds great,
Christ.
but The downside of this is like too much compound. One, it's going to be really hard, and there's a chemistry lesson to stay in solution. If you have too much in the oil, it's not going to be stable. It's going to crash. In other words, it's going to fall out. It's going to crystallize. It's just going to be really hard to keep it from, to inject properly. That's why you don't see these massive doses per milliliter. The other issue with that too is, when you're injecting all that into one location, whether it be a large amount of oil or if you have too many milligrams of active, compounds, it's going to cause some issues in the muscle. You keep hitting the same spot or using too much or using like a really shitty compound, so on and so forth in terms of the oil carrier, you're going to have nodding, you're going to have soreness, you're going to have issues in terms of the injection site. So I will warn you though, on your first time you ever use a cycle, you're going to be fucking sore, okay? Extremely so. Virgin muscle tissue. The first time you do a cycle, like, oh my God, my glutes have never been so fucking sore in my life. I will never pin my quads again. I've had I've tried it twice in my life. I had a horrible experience both times. I'm like, nope. And I have other sites I like, but bro, I don't know if people can pin their quads. I'm too much of a bitch. Or maybe my quads just say no. But the thing too to keep in mind, if you're having soreness from pinning, one, it could be A, you're trying to put too much muscle there. B, it could be this a virgin muscle tissue, it's just not used to it. Over time, it gets better. 3, you may be putting too much too often in the same muscle group. That's another factor. Or C, one thing that's kind of out of your control, and we're no way, shape, or form we're going to discuss sources on this episode. But if your person or wherever you're getting it from uses whatever like stabilization agents, oils, carriers, so on and so forth, too high in the acid content, so on and so forth, it can make it hurt. It can make the muscle crash. It can make the muscle irritated.
Bad.
Some use grapeseed oil, cottonseed oil, so on and so forth.
Yep.
The best shit that I love this stuff. It's MCT based.
Yeah.
It's fucking awesome.
Yeah,
so
it's good. A little bit more pricey.
Those are a few quick.
A little bit more expensive, but you should go with that too. I mean, yeah, you could get a bad batch of backwater on something too if you're doing, if it's water based, and you could have yourself a fucking knot. Like, here's the thing, and not to go off the rails here, but if you end up developing one of those knots or whatever, it's not a tumor, it's not cancer. Like, you can literally take a tennis ball, roll it out, take some ibuprofen, and just keep rolling it out until it goes away. I've had one before. They suck, they're painful, they hurt, and you look at it and you're like, holy shit, I just gave myself cancer. Like, that's what you think because you're not sure. But it's definitely, you can get up. But to Drew's point, yeah, you're going to be sore. And the first time you do a cycle, at least in my personal experience, I was scared shitless. I was scared because, you see these movies, if you get a little air bubble in the syringe, you think you're going to die, but you're not injecting into a vein. Just, relax, chill out. You'll be all right. You're going to be good. But back to compounds here. One that I skipped over, I should have jumped in with test. I think it's probably the most common stack when it comes to contest prep a lot. I mean, at least it's an old school stack, is you have your test that we talked about, and then DECA. DECA is going to be a very popular one that people use. DECA's got a couple good benefits with it, with test. I mean, obviously for me, what I liked about DECA was it helped with my joints a lot, and soreness. So when you get on a test load, you start lifting heavier, that's a lot of wear and tear on the body, and DECA really helped with that. The negative side of that was the water that you hold. You can be a little bloated from it, but it's part of the process. Typically, you're taking DECA early in your contest prep, 12 weeks plus out, because as you get into 12, 10, 8 weeks, you don't want to be holding water. So that, but I think, in terms of compound, it's another one that I think is relatively safe, and it complements test very well.
No, DECA is great. A lot of people like it. I've personally never used it, believe it or not.
Really?
I've never used DECA. I have no interest in using DECA. when I wanted to run the compound, I jumped straight to NPP. So those of you out there listening, NPP and DECA are both the same drug. It's nandrolone. One of them is nandrolone decanate. In other words, a long ester version, also known as DECA for short. NPP is nandrolone phenylpropionate. I like the NPP because you get the fullness, the joint support, the strength, the mass, everything in DECA without the water. Once again, we go kind of back to the long ester for short ester as a water retention. I rarely have any issues whatsoever when it comes to water when I've used NPP. I really like it for that reason. Amazing fullness, like you blow the fuck up. It's not uncommon on this one to gain like 3 or 4 pounds at least initially a week over the course of it. You're just like, holy shit, everything you eat just sticks to you. A lot of it's nitrogen retention, muscle fullness, glycogen fullness. It's not always true muscle, but thing is too is it sticks to you. So yeah, it is very common. A lot of people love it for joints, or even take a low dose of it just kind of as a maintenance thing for joint health. That is very common for strength, of course, and mass gains as well. Another one that's super common, a lot of people like adding it in. My downside is it takes a very long time to kick in, and it takes a fairly high amount because it's not always dosed very high in terms of it, is EQ, equipoise, also known as boldenone. The pros of this one is if you have appetite issues, the main thing I noticed from it, it makes you just want to eat your fucking house. You're always hungry. It has a nice slow, steady strength gains, and also it has a nice bit of fullness. And the main part, it can also help bring out some vascularity.
Right.
If you're a fat, pudgy fuck, even if you take UQ, you're not going to have veins magic overnight, but it will help with that one.
Yeah.
The downside of this one is it takes a long time to get in your system. If you are, for whatever reason, taking it in the off season, if you're a piece of shit and you have a drug-tested organization, you be aware it's also one of the longest one hanging out esters is going to be in your body. It sits detectable for a long time, even after you get off of it, in terms of detection. And the other part you got to be super careful with, and that's any compound, especially test or especially EQ. Keep an eye on your hematocrit levels and your red blood cell count, because how it works, testosterone, EQ, all these, they increase your endurance and training capacity by increasing red blood cell count. The pro of this is endurance, oxygen carry capacity. The downside is it can make your blood thick.
Thick as fuck. Yeah.
Thick blood is not a good idea to a certain degree because it increases risk of cardiovascular events. Okay. Just in general, keep an eye on your hematocrit levels, your cholesterol levels, and your liver enzymes. TUDCA is an amazing thing to keep in there. I mean, we've done another episode on PEDs, but in general, if you're going to do this, you need to keep an eye on your blood work. And I've said this before: if you have the money to do a contest prep stack, but then you tell me you can't afford $75 in blood work, you're a fucking asshole.
Right.
Like, seriously.
It's stupid.
I don't understand that.
It's amazing, yeah. And EQ too, back on that point as well. It's one of the more minor compounds too. I mean, it's not a strong thing in terms of like trend or anything like that. It's minor. You might not see a lot from it. Some people might not see a lot at all. I mean, it's working, but it doesn't work significantly quick. Like you're not going to see something massively change in 3 days. Like Drew said, it takes time on EQ, and EQ is still kind of a staple in a lot of people's contest preps as they go. Going to talk two compounds that are used quite frequently when you start to get closer to stage day. You want to cut down that body fat. You need to get down to 5-6% body fat. You're typically going to be taking Winstrol, Anavar is a lot of times what you're going to be taking. Now, Winstrol you can take orally and injectable, and an Anavar I believe is just orally, right? So I would take an injectable all day, every day. Anavar, I mean, I think there's not an injectable form of Anavar, is there? It's all pill format, right?
I'm sure somebody's attempted it out there, and once again, I don't honestly, quite frankly, don't know.
Right.
But most times you're going to find it in tablet form. I haven't used Winstrol in any of my preps except for my second one. Aside from that, usually I don't feel it's necessary. I'm not a big fan of it. I don't notice, once again, a whole lot from it. It just the pros of it can dry you out. It makes you look super dry, really crisp. It's a nice finishing touch. The downside, it's super hard on liver enzymes. It'll dry your joints out, so your joints just fucking hurt. That's the downside. It's a very potent DHT-based drug, and it also have issues with hair loss if you're more sensitive to that. VAR is kind of a cousin of that. It's a different compound, very similar effects, hardening, vascularity. I'd prefer some VAR over the Winstrol. Downside of VAR, it's very expensive. The pros of it is that it's very mild. It's what a lot of ladies will use as maybe a lot of times as standalone compounds, like bikini girls, figure girls. It's very common because it's low side effects, not very androgenic in terms of hair loss, acne, things like that. It's very mild. It's just a lot of times you have to be careful. Sometimes some asshole dealers will be selling you Winstrol and say it's VAR. It's expensive. Yeah. So that's something too. Of course, there's staples in your prep. It's not exactly anabolics, but through a duration of most of your prep, clenbuterol is an excellent agent. It's a beta-2 agonist. It's a cousin of albuterol. Mm-hmm. It was originally developed as an asthma drug and never passed FDA, regulation because it's too long of a half-life. But it increases metabolism like crazy. It's awesome for the cutting drug. I like to stack it with a low dose of T3, which is synthetic thyroid hormone. It's a peanut butter and jelly stack. It makes a beautiful stack. We'll talk about stacks as a whole in general. I'm not going to give away like a whole thing. I mean, that's what people pay coaching for. And I'm not going to give you a how-to guide, but
right.
It's another compounds are very common. It kind of complement all these things. So that's another thing too.
One thing to warn people on clenbuterol though, just make sure you monitor how much you take. The first time I took it, I took a little too much, and then I was shaking like a motherfucker. So you also want to watch your caffeine intake with it as well. Too much caffeine with too much clenbuterol, you are going to be bouncing off the fucking walls. But it's good, yeah. Like to your point, I mean, it works amazing for appetite suppressant. It works good, increased body temperature, thermogenic, and it's we've had this conversation before, Drew. ECA or clenbuterol. I think the big difference between an ECA stack, which is going to be your ephedrine, caffeine, aspirin, versus clenbuterol, I think the side effects might be just a little bit different between the two. But overall, I think that you've mentioned that you prefer the clenbuterol versus the ECA.
Yeah, they're both beta agonists. So the ECA stack, particularly the only one you can really find that's true ephedra is like the synthetic version of it, because in a way that comes like Broncaid, something like that. C is caffeine, A is aspirin, ephedrine, caffeine, aspirin. It's kind of an over-the-counter one. Clenbuterol is so easy to get. You use a lot less of it. I feel it's much cleaner. I like how it, works in that regard. Same thing. I just prefer that route.
Yeah.
Another one that most people don't, I guess, ever think of. I've never used D-ball, Dianabol. Really have no interest in it.
Right.
A lot of powerlifters like it. It's great for short-term, like, strength, super fast strength increases. You'll blow up in terms of weight. Like, you hold a lot of water with it. It's a great bulking drug for some, but it's not true weight in my opinion, and it can fuck your blood pressure. I actually really like to stay full sometimes on prep, depending on the prep. This prep not so much. Last year I liked it a lot. Turinabol, it's T-ball. Basically what that is a second generation D-ball, but it's a dry version of it. Great fullness, crazy pumps. You stay full on it. It's great to add in to maintain fullness on a stack. Once again, just different experience levels, different stacks, and so forth. That can be a great recomposition agent as well to stay full. Some people also as well, this one is very common in a bulking stack, like peanut butter and jelly. A lot of people like doing this with Tren or Test, and it's also great for strength gains. It's very powerlifting, is an old school one, Anadrol. Anadrol is very good. It will raise your blood pressure pretty quickly if you're not careful with it, but the strength is nuts on it. The first time I used it back in the day, in an off season, my issue with it, and some orals can do this, it wrecked my appetite. Like honestly, it just made you not hungry. So orals can have that effect on it. Second time I used it a couple years later, I was like, I actually really enjoyed it, but it is, you feel like heavy with it, if that's a weird way of saying. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of it, but a lot of people, they freaking love it. But it will fuck your blood pressure, and it can have a huge anything oral wise. Right. Be very hard to liver enzymes. You just feel toxic, if that's a way of putting it.
That's why Tudka is something solid to have in your cabinet for sure. So, or I use I use liver from Revive MD, which is Tudka, NAC, and I believe milk thistle, which is solid. But that T-ball is great. It's also basically from experience like Viagra as well. I mean, it's a whole different world if you're a dude, so you're going to enjoy that for sure if you like that. Two other compounds we'll talk about here that aren't steroids per se, but they are used quite a bit in contest prep. The first is going to be growth hormone, which is a peptide. Now, I'm a huge fan of growth hormone in general. Like, I think it's a lot more safe than a lot of the other compounds that we take. I mean, depending on if you are dosing it correctly. Now, we didn't talk about so most of the stuff that we talked about before is either going to be oral or IM, intramuscular, in terms of injection. So you're going to be using more along the lines of like a longer needle. Now, if you're lean enough, you can get by with an insulin syringe and go into your adult. I know some people do that, but like growth, for instance, the sub-Q, you go into the belly fat. A lot of people do like 4 IUs a day. But the problem with that is most of the shit's probably fake on the market, or it's just HCG. So real growth is expensive, but it works extremely well.
The thing about growth is going to take a long time, quite frankly, a lot of times to notice much from it. The first thing you'll notice is how your recovery rate is. Your skin looks amazing. You just feel good on it. Highest I ever used is 4 IU a day, a split, and I liked it a lot. It helps you stay leaner when you're in an off season. It can help you maintain some nice muscle fullness. It can help have you hold a little bit of water with it. So I mean, not something like toward later preps a stack, honestly drop it. It is very expensive. That's the downside of it. A lot of times shit is fake. With that being said, it is a good compound in there. So it works better with other things. As a standalone, I don't think most people are going to notice a lot from it, except for if you're looking for anti-aging, that's a different story. But in terms of true muscle growth, I mean, you see people blasting these large amounts of it. Either A, they're not getting real shit and they can afford it, or B, they have, a mattress full of cash, whatever it may be. If you can afford more growth, great. The more the better to a certain degree. But then, of course, you have some different possible side effects. Organ enlargement, carpal tunnel, because it increases, tendons, shit like that. It can have some negative sides. And main thing is this is very expensive. It's cost prohibitive for a lot of people.
Yeah, you're going to buy them in a kit typically. And, that kit, depending on where you get it from, it can be as little. I mean, if you have, $300-$400 a kit, it can be up to $3,000 a kit, depending on if you go through a compound pharmacy. I mean, if you're buying it through a pharmacy, the quote-unquote legit way, you're going to pay thousands of dollars for it. Some of them, they also have, growth pens now too that you can inject with it, but there's limited number of dosages in it and they're expensive as fuck as well. The other thing, and it's one thing that I refuse to touch, and but it's popular, is insulin, Slin. Like I don't want to do it only because I make one mistake with dosing, I could fuck my whole self up on this one. But it's very popular on contest prep. People will inject insulin. It helps with a plethora of different things, your muscle fullness and pumps. I don't have any personal experience with it, so I can't speak on that. But I will, I just know it's super popular. And I think if it's done correctly, I've heard horror stories before, but if it's done correctly, it can be super beneficial.
Yeah, it can be very awesome. I've used it a couple times, quite in an off season. I really like it. I'm not a big fan of long acting insulin, like shit, like high insulin all day. But in terms of short acting stuff like pre workout, that's one time I found it was helpful. And once again, this is a very advanced protocol. Do not fucking do this. Okay, it's
Simple.
very dangerous.
Yeah.
Okay, this seriously, do not fuck with this stuff. Unless you're a very advanced user, even then, at your own fucking risk. But Humalog, which is short-acting insulin, or Nova Rapid, which is a Canadian version of a short ester one, pre-training, along with a large amount of, relative of fast-acting sugary carbohydrates. Some of the most insane, stupidly, almost painful pumps that you will ever experience in your life. It is fucking stupid. The downside of Slin is obviously, if you fuck it up, death. That's never fun.
Yeah, that's a big downside for sure.
The other part too is if you use too much of it, if your insulin spike level elevated, you're going to be in storage mode. It's also pretty easy to blow the fuck up and get fat. If you fuck up your insulin, you start keeping pounding a bunch of carbs. I think a lot of times it's not so much insulin itself, it's fear, because people take insulin, they start taking carbs and carbs and carbs and carbs. Oh fucking hypoglycemic, and then they eat too much and they get fat. So you just need to regulate your dose. You don't need tons of IUs of this shit. Just keep it in check, and I think it can be a useful agent. But honestly, I'm sure Chris Aceto is a fantastic coach out there. He's amazing. He's big on insulin protocols. I personally never use it on a contest prep stack. I really wouldn't. But when I'm pro of it too, and here's a devil's advocate, some people advocate it in an off season or properly used because it's less wear and tear on the pancreas. It's not having to produce its own insulin. There's pros and cons to this, obviously, but it is something worth discussing. So on that note, we can move on to the next thing, but a brief note on that.
Yeah, I think as we wrap up the episode here, the thing too, as we talk about contest prep, we talked about a lot of different compounds here, Drew. It's not uncommon for someone to be on 4, 5, 6 compounds at one time. I mean, it's, you ask people like what their stack looks like. And I remember the first time I asked somebody what they were on, and I think they listed off 4 or 5 things. I was like, holy fuck, like that's a lot, I mean, I thought that was a lot then, but it's not uncommon to be on that many different compounds. And then people are like, well, how do you know what's working, what's not working? I think to Drew's point before, he mentioned like peanut butter and jelly. Some of these compounds complement each other very nicely, and they go well together. So, I mean, the typical number of compounds that you're going to probably be on is probably anywhere from 3 to 6. I mean, in that case, as you go through a 12, 15-week prep, that's not uncommon. So if you are thinking about this, understand that there's going to be a lot of stuff. Understand that it's not cheap. It's expensive. Understand that you should get your fucking blood work done and pay that money to get that done. And understand that you might become a pincushion for 12 weeks. So, it's something that you're going to have to deal with if you're serious about, competing at the highest level.
Yep. Third part too, I mean, one little prep hack here, and especially the reason I love mixes. The downside of mixes is that if you want to customize it, like, okay, for example, there's different ratios of, say, trend to test or NPP to test. Secrets, but things like that. If something's already pre-blended and say a mix, you can't really customize it. You're stuck with the dosages per milliliter. The pro of that though is if it's the mix that you prefer and like, you can get away with a lot. You have more compounds within a smaller amount of oil, and you can use things like I absolutely love, and I may masochist whatever here. I'll pin daily when I'm using some of my short ester stuff in prep. The rationale for this is it keeps. I'd rather take smaller amounts more frequently than large esters or larger amounts more spaced out because it keeps blood levels more stable, less side effects, less fluctuations, so on and so forth, more even feel composition wise. So for example, if you're using that cut mix or whatever there, I'm a big fan of backloading insulin needles. Super small, 1/2-inch pins. If you're lean at this point, it's great. Yep. Rotate between pinning your delts, your pecs, are two actually a very common one. Yeah, I'll pin my chest with those slim pins. It's great. It's awesome. Between delts and slim pins, rotate those sites, keep your muscles fresh. You're not putting this big ass needle in your muscles, less wear and tear, less trauma. And it rotates it away. Another big thing too, try it out, is when it comes, especially getting closer to show, stop pinning your fucking glutes, because I think too, if you've been pinning your glutes forever and you get lean, you're gonna likely have a golf ball on your ass on stage. That's not a good look for anybody. I mean, I saw it a couple, I think 2 years ago at the Olympia, somebody had some pretty bad marking. I'm like, bro, and you see it sometimes in shows, some of these guys, they don't stop pinning their glutes, and you can tell that's all the scar tissue from sticking their fucking glutes, have these weird lumps on their ass. It's a scar tissue buildup that can go away over time, but you can definitely tell, man, okay, I've been pinning for a while in the same spot. It kind of like a hard or a more firm lump here. It doesn't necessarily hurt, but you can tell it's definitely brutal. So some injection sites, glutes are a good favorite one, super easy. Delts, using, once again, if you know what you're doing, a shorter needle is great. Those are two primary sites I'd recommend. If you're more experienced, a great spot. Some people are scared as fuck to do this, but your ventral glute, when you Google that shit, ventral glute injection, you're like, what the fuck? Because it looks like you're stabbing yourself in the hip. But there's a huge pocket of tissue there. It's nothing to get sore. It's not a moving muscle. It's actually a medical injection site. It works really fucking well. You can do things. I wouldn't get carried away. I'm going to pin my calves. I'm going to pin my biceps. I'm going to pin my triceps. I've done biceps and triceps with a slit needle before. It's not bad, but once again, anytime we get into smaller muscle groups, you have a higher risk of hitting something you're not supposed to. I wouldn't recommend it. It's not a good idea. No. But delts for sure. Pecs, if you know what you're doing, can be a great spot. Some people like pinning their traps. I know actually a guy here that you know as well. He likes pinning his lats.
Oh, fuck.
Kid you not? He flares his lat out. He'll stick it in his lat. I'm like,
nope, I'm good.
Interesting.
I mean, no, thank you. I've done my quads recently, but I have hit a nerve before, and it's weird. Your quad will fucking do a little dance for you. The last thing we'll do as we wrap up this episode is obviously in conjunction with these compounds, you need to be taking an aromatase inhibitor, an AI. You need to take something with that, whether it's Arimidex, Aromacin. There's a plethora of other ones too. I mean, if you start to feel soreness in the nipple area, start getting puffy, you need to nip that shit in the butt real quick. Anastrozole or whatever. I think Arimidex is probably the most popular that a lot of people will take. But I mean, some of the other ones are what, Drew, that others are taking right now?
Arimidex is the most popular one. It's also known as anastrozole. Interesting. I'm not a responder to anastrozole. My body does not respond to it like it should.
Yeah.
I know this for a fact. When my first contest prep, I went and had blood work done, and I was pretty far in it, and this is a good reason to get blood work done. I didn't have any sides. I didn't have gyno. I didn't have water retention or anything like that, but, I had I wasn't feeling good, okay, make sure I wasn't toxic or anything. Bro, my estrogen was through the roof. It was at 234.
Woo!
So I went to the TRT guy and said, okay, what I'm going to do, I'm put you on a 2 milligrams a day of natural, which is insane just for a few days to get it down and retested. Yep. So basically here's the thing, about a half a milligram every other day for relative perspective is a common dose of this for maintenance. He did an emergency protocol. Once again, this is not standard practice. This is, a guy knows what he's doing, TRT clinic in that case, back in Omaha, Nebraska. Okay, I took that, 2 milligrams a day, for a week, came back and retested. And he's like, okay, it's still pretty high to drop to a milligram a day. But then the thing is, after 2 weeks, he's like, what the fuck? You're eating this shit like candy. This was from a legitimate pharmacy that they work with, an actual, Walgreens, CVS type pharmacy. It was a legitimate, true anastrozole. He's like, well, this isn't very common. You're in a very small percentage, a 0.5% in the world that doesn't respond. But clearly you're one of the people that does not respond to anastrozole. So I just switched to another compound. I personally like exemestane or Aromacin, which is a different type of AI. So the difference between the two, anastrozole, Arimidex, it binds to estrogen and just prevents it from attaching. Exemestane or Aromacin, on your hand, is a suicide inhibitor. Basically, it bonds to the estrogen on there and basically circulates and just it kills the molecule. It doesn't allow it to attach. So there's two different ways of these mechanisms work. I like the latter. No. Another one that's very common is letrozole. That one is very super potent. It takes a low dose of it. It's like a super anastrozole. That one I have used and it does work. You have to be very careful with that one too because it can crush your estrogen levels and you can be likely to do an estrogen rebound. In other words, if you crush it too low, your body can bounce back to a higher level. Yeah. So that one is a very serious compound in terms of that one. You can fuck yourself badly. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point there. Arimidex is your typical, right? Aromacin, for me, I had to take it because I had some soreness, almost like an emergency protocol, like you said, to where we started taking a half a tablet of Aromacin for a while. And 3-4 days, it was gone. It was fine. So a lot of information was covered on this podcast. We talked compounds, AIs, peptides, injection sites. Again, just to reiterate, Drew and I are not here telling you to take anything. We're not doctors. We're nothing like that saying, this stuff is going to give you X, Y, Z. Obviously, whatever you take, that's your prerogative. It's your own body. Make sure that you take care of yourself. Blood work, consistent other supplementation that takes care of your vital organs, your AIs, and make sure you do the fucking work. You can't pin yourself, sit on the couch, and expect to get big. It doesn't work that way. So if you're out there and you're one of those people who judge people for taking anabolic steroids, understand this. They still have to work just as hard, if not harder than everybody else, to put that shit to use. So if you like what you heard on the podcast, hit that subscribe button. We're on iTunes, Spotify, over at iTunes, YouTube, Spotify. We are on Facebook at the Iron Jungle Podcast, at Vanilla Girl Drew on the IG, at Fitness Informant on IG. And any topic suggestions, let us know. Otherwise, hit that rating button. Leave us a review. Helps out the algorithm. And I'm sure most people are going to enjoy this show. It's one of our longest shows to date, one of the most interesting shows to date. And let the questions come. You get one question for free. After that, we're going to start charging you.